Regarding Men with Paul Elam, Janice Fiamengo, and Tom Golden. Episode 2, Lorena Bobbitt and Amazon Studios. Welcome to Regarding Men, Episode 2 with Janice Fiamengo, Paul Elam, and Tom Golden. We got a barn burner for you today. Oh boy, it's on Lorena Bobbitt. You know, Amazon Studios is doing a special, a 4-part special on Lorena Bobbitt, wanting to tell her side of the story. What's wrong with this picture? Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is that, who is the most famous perpetrator of domestic violence in United States history? I'd say that would have to be Lorena Bobbitt. And they want to do a story on her, telling her side, the side of the perpetrator. Okay, and who is the United States' most famous victim of domestic violence? I think that would have to be John Bobbitt. And they're going to ignore him. Crazy stuff. So where do we go, guys?
Oh, Lord, Tom. This is a sort of a complicated story.
Yes, it is.
Because here you have two people who are, as I was saying earlier, I couldn't imagine a couple that deserved each other more than these two. You have two people who were abusive. I think that as I look back on the record of all this, it was pretty well established that both of them were abusive. There was a mutual abuse in the relationship. But before I get onto the Amazon, well, first I'm going to say Amazon doing a 4-part series on domestic violence featuring Lorena Bobbitt is like doing a series on financial advice with Bernie Madoff.
Yes, exactly.
That part, I don't care what John Wayne Bobbitt did. That part of it is absolutely insane.
It's crazy.
It's like the left just feels licensed to pick the worst poster children for everything they want to do. And I guess it's kind of an ingenious tactic in one way. I mean, if she can be a poster child for victimhood in domestic violence after severing her husband's penis. And by the way, history of violence against her mother. She was arrested for hitting her mother.
Right.
And also acquitted, just as she was about cutting off his penis. But this whole story is just rooted in craziness from the beginning.
Yes.
But to take a look at it, I'm hard-pressed to feel too much empathy for Mr. Bobbitt. I mean, although having he didn't do anything apparently to deserve getting your penis cut off. When the police came after the incident, her first words to them was that he never waited for me to orgasm.
Right.
It wasn't he raped me, as she later alleged. It wasn't that he physically abused me. It was that he was sexually selfish.
Right.
And she had, and you'll find a link to it below, folks, she had disclosed to friends before the incident that if she ever suspected he was cheating, she would cut his penis off.
Yep.
And lo and behold, that's what happened. And apparently she lied about that in court. But anyway, my bottom line on this is that this is more craziness from the left. Let's pick the least favorable person we possibly can and make them a poster child for the very wrong. I mean, a poster child for people in need of mental health services, yeah. I would buy that. Yeah. She's a sick woman,
yes.
Patently emotionally disturbed. But a victim across the board, no, she's a violent perpetrator.
Yes.
She has been with two different members of her own family. So I'm sort of disgusted with this.
It is really disgusting. To me, it signifies the where we are in modern feminism, in which, there's almost a gleeful, smug determination to rub everyone's faces in the fact that no matter what the woman has done, no matter what kind of horrific violence and utter lack of remorse or self-recognition that she displays, she can still be brought forward and celebrated as a brave survivor, as both a victim and also a heroine, somebody who, I mean, the language of the Amazon Prime advertisements are, and of the director and the producer of this so-called documentary, they couldn't be more stock feminist and more divorced from reality if you tried to create a parody. They talk about how you had sent this around, Tom, about how she, found strength through the scars that she had endured. It's parodic. One of the I wrote it down here so that I wouldn't forget. The producer said that where was it now? That this was her chance. Oh yes, here it is. With this project, Lorena has a platform to tell her truth, as well as engage in a critical conversation about gender dynamics, abuse, and her demand for justice. I mean, it's incredible. And her own, words about what she experienced, the utter, she's never had a moment of remorse. She's still angry at Howard Stern that he dared to mock her and to say that he didn't believe the story that she told on the witness stand. She's so firmly grounded in this, narrative of pure victimhood and therefore utter lack of responsibility for anything that she's ever done, that she does imagine herself as a champion for, irony of ironies, victims of domestic violence.
Yes.
I mean, it's
crazy.
It's beyond words. I don't know what to say about it. And it's doubly horrific in the sense, I mean, we don't have to dwell on, what would happen if this were all reversed, if there was a man who had, done something horrific to his wife, jammed a knife up her vagina or something, and then claimed that he'd been abused. And then they make a 4-part documentary talking about his pain and how he went on, gain courage to become a champion of victims. I mean, of course, it would never happen, so it's not even worth talking about. But if it did happen in some parallel universe, there would just be expressions of outrage. People would protest at the film. I don't suppose anybody will protest when, I don't know if it's already been shown. It's being shown at the Sundance Film Festival, I know, but sometime in this week, I guess. Coming up. Yeah. And, I don't suppose anybody will object or stand up in the middle of it and shout boo or shame or anything, which I would love to do if I were there. But, it's just really remarkable the extent to which, the radical feminist left will go in rubbing our faces in their twisted version of reality. And the other thing I was going to say was that, the act of women mutilating their husbands or boyfriends, often purely out of revenge, and even quite overtly stated that they did this because they discovered that their husbands were being unfaithful. It's not all that uncommon. I haven't researched the subject extensively, but I read a couple of articles. It is apparently quite common in Thailand, to the extent that there are doctors that have specialized in penis reattachment. It's that common that women will do this to their husbands if they discover that they've been unfaithful, or if they discover or just suspect. And I read one article, but it was unsourced, and it was in Vice magazine, but it was talking about the history of, so who knows, but it was talking about the history of women doing this to their partners. And he claimed, in a very strange, jokey, gleeful article, that there were a number of copycat mutilations that were obviously inspired by the Lorena Bobbitt affair in the couple of years following. So this is more common than we kind of generally recognize. And the very fact that there could be copycat mutilations, and that now we're going to have a film that glorifies the act of this supposedly valiant, survivor and, advocate for victims, is, I actually think, really quite terrifying.
Yes. Nauseating.
Yeah.
It's just
Let me say
nauseating.
a couple of things in response to that. One, just a note for all the guys that come into my comments on my videos and say, guys, go get yourself a woman in Asia. Please follow up and read about what's going on in Thailand. And then consider maybe perhaps another option. The other thing is that I also remember distinctly at the time that Argentinian feminists proclaimed at the time that Lorena Bobbitt was on trial, that, because I think she's of Argentinian descent, is that if she were found guilty, that they would cut the penises off of hundreds of men in retaliation. And I'll dig that up and get it to you for the links. I remember that distinctly, though.
Wow.
I wanted to touch on something else too briefly about this. I mean, and again, I certainly have a lot of sympathy for anybody that gets their genitals mutilated. I mean, it's a horrific thing to have happened. But I remember feeling a lot of anger over all the jokes about this, that it was so, I mean, and some of them were admittedly somewhat funny. I mean, you look at even the name Bobbitt, a bob is a cut.
Right.
And all the water fountain banter and joking about what happened to this guy. And then you look at the same time that so many of these jokes were coming from men. And two, you look at what John Wayne Bobbitt did himself afterward. He started a rock band, which he named Severed Parts, and then starred in 2 porn movies that showcase trying to capitalize on what happened to him. And later on, he was arrested for petty thievery, that sort of thing, did some time over it. Not a really sympathetic character, but the problem of the way society reacts to this, I've heard a lot of people characterize it as women or just feminists. It's not.
Right.
This is a deep bitterness toward men that's apparently innate in most of us.
Oh, the whole culture's been inoculated with gynocentrism. I mean, it's like people don't even know it. It's an inoculation that happens before birth. And what happens is we end up only seeing one side, literally. You know, I call it the Mobius strip. You know, it's like feminism is like a Mobius strip. You got only one side. You go around and take your finger around, it's just one side all the time. It's crazy. Even the research is just one side. I mean, you think researchers are like, they're going to look at both sides, right? No, these guys are horrible. I did a video one time on domestic violence. I saw this research that said 1 in 5 men will commit or have been violent towards their spouse. I thought, wow, how about that? Then I saw article after article in the media saying the same thing. 1 in 5 men do this. So I thought, well, that's crazy. So I wrote to the researcher and I said, you know, did you consider including male victims in your research? And he wrote me back after a while. It took him a while. He wrote me back, and what he wrote back was fascinating. You know, we had a conversation. He was a nice guy. You know, we wrote back 3 or 4 times, and he explained why he only wanted to include women. And the explanations were so lame. But that's what he was thinking. That was his way of seeing things. This is a bright guy, you know, but he's only able to see a little bit. You know, one of the things he says, as I'd like physicians to think about asking men about IPV, interpersonal violence, a place to start is from the traditional heterosexual model of women as victims and men as perpetrators. Eventually, physicians may get to a point where asking women about perpetration and men about victimization, the medical community is not there yet and may not be there for many years. That's the kind of thing he said. This is a researcher, you know? It's like, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, look at it this way, Tom. I mean, right dovetailing immediately off of that was my introduction to all this material to begin with. When I read Myth of Male Power back in '93, I worked at a treatment facility in which we assessed every woman who came through the door for whether she had been a victim of domestic violence.
Right.
And we assessed every man who came through the door for whether or not he had perpetrated domestic violence.
Yes.
And in a mild defense of your researcher, when I brought that to our staff collectively and said, I got to ask you, why are we doing this? I mean,
Right.
because I at that point, I started asking my
Right.
clients, and I had one of them at that time who at one point in the relationship, his wife had clobbered him on the head with a fireplace poker while he was sleeping, resulting in 12 stitches on his head. And we didn't even, he'd been there 2 weeks. We didn't know about this, right? Until I asked.
Right.
And so
Right.
I went to the staff and said, look, why aren't we assessing everybody for whether or not they're perpetrating violence or whether or not they're a victim of violence? And the entire staff instantly became furious with me.
Huh.
And these are people with PhDs and,
Right.
and master's degrees. And they immediately like, oh my God, like you just said, why don't we deny treatment to Black people? That's what I was saying. So it doesn't surprise me. Your experience with that
it's the same inoculation.
Yeah.
Same inoculation. It's everywhere. And you got to take a red pill in order to see it.
Yeah.
In fact, you got to take a bunch of red pills to get there.
The idea that harms to men simply don't matter, and in fact are in popular culture the source of gleefulness and joy. We all remember, of course, that disgusting episode of, what was it called, The Talk, I think, where what was her name? Marilyn Osborne? Is that
Sharon Osbourne?
Sharon Osbourne, yeah. Yeah, which she talked about how I forget the word she used exactly. That was fantastic. And this was a later case. This was like, I think, a 2011 case of a California woman who, and I don't think she ever used the excuse of that she'd been abused, but she drugged her husband, tied him to the bed, and cut off his penis, and left him there on the bed in agony. And this was a source of a great deal of hilarity amongst the women on this talk show and the audience. I mean, there were guffaws, roars of laughter, giggles, titillated shrieks. I mean, it's quite something. It should be looked at every day, I think, by people who don't believe that things are really that bad.
Yes.
Who think it's confined to a small minority of radical feminists.
Yes.
That was the case of Catherine Becker Q.
That's it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or Q Becker, maybe, I think it was.
One of those.
One of those. Yeah. Yeah.
Kathy
exactly.
With the knife.
Yeah, Kathy with the knife, and the idea that all a woman has to say is that she was abused in some way, or that whether her husband was selfish, whatever, and that provides a get out of jail free card. Quite literally, in the case of Lorena Bobbitt, of course, she ended up with 45 days in a psychiatric institute, after which she miraculously recovered and was released. And there was a famous Canadian case. This was a woman, not anything to do with cutting off a penis, but a woman who hired a hitman to kill her husband. Her last name was Doucette. Then she changed it. That was her maiden name. I can't remember her first name right now. Anyway, she, Nova Scotia woman whose husband wanted to divorce her, and so she hired a hitman to kill him. And fortunately, the person that she hired was actually an RCMP officer, police officer. And so she was brought to trial. It was thought that it was going to be an open and shut case. It was obvious that she had indeed attempted to hire somebody to murder her husband. But then once she was on the stand, she did a Lorena Bobbitt, and she claimed that he'd been violent and abusive, and that she feared for her life, and all of that sort of thing. And there was no evidence whatsoever. The police had never visited the home. There were no reports of violence or anything like that over a 15-year marriage. But it was accepted. She was acquitted. The man, who was still alive, said that everything that she charged him with was completely false. His only crime was wanting to divorce her. This case was appealed all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada because it was so outrageous. The Supreme Court ultimately stayed the proceedings on the grounds that she had already suffered enough. But she hadn't suffered at all.
Right.
The only suffering she endured was
What
having
does
to
that
go through
even
the trial.
mean?
And
She has a vagina.
Yeah, I mean, it's really,
It's crazy.
yeah, it's
And
quite
my biggest beef
remarkable.
is that the biggest beef is that this daggone TV show is going to do the same thing in spades. You know, it's.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm almost sure that's what they're going to do. Just from reading the little blips they have before, it's just like they're going to do the same thing. They're going to, you know, further inoculate our population in thinking in a Mobius strip kind of way, so we can only see one side of things.
Yeah.
Crazy.
And the whole while, the part to me that's really dangerous about this is that you have an active push to excuse, even to, you know, glorify and lionize women who commit heinous acts in the name of bringing attention to problems like domestic violence.
Right.
And then at the same time, they are working so hard and actively on expanding the definition of what that violence is, so that any
Yes.
type of, you know, he didn't buy me something I wanted. Well, that's financial abuse, which is emotional abuse, which is the same thing as physical abuse. It's okay to cut his penis off.
Right.
That's
Mhm.
what we're dealing with here.
That's it.
Yeah.
And it's a
Mhm.
frightening scenario.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's absolutely crazy.
Yeah, and that law has been passed in Ireland, I think maybe in the whole of the UK, to say that, psychological abuse, emotional abuse,
Australia.
you know, all of those, anything you can say made you feel bad, it counts up there
Jeez.
as domestic violence, for which men can be put in prison, and for which obviously women can then turn around and commit horrific violence against men.
Yeah. It's crazy. And, you know, one of the things that strikes me about this case is that Lorena Bobbitt, according to the court documents, has an IQ of 83.
So she's
You know,
borderline.
she is only a standard deviation above retarded,
Right.
you know? So I think that plays into things too, because I'm sure you guys know that they have now correlated violence with IQ.
Yeah.
That the lower the IQ, the more chances you will be violent. And I think John Bobbitt may share that number with her too. I mean, judging from what he's done, he doesn't seem like he's a really bright guy. You know, one of the guys that they tried to get him to be a stand-up comic, and in trying to do this, they had to teach him lines for a 7-minute routine. A 7-minute routine. And the guy who was trying to teach him said, I teach him A, and then he'd get A. Then I'd teach him B, and he'd forget A. I'd teach him C, and he'd forget B. He said he couldn't remember the lines. So that tells me, you know, he may be up there with Lorena in this. And you get two people in a relationship who have low IQ, the chance of violence goes up. You know, it's something I've never heard people in domestic violence talk about. You know, that really IQ is so critical, and a part of what it's pulling us to do is to be able to teach people who have lower IQ how to deal with any kind of marital difficulty. Because, man, I mean, marital arguments come up like lightning. Boom! If you're not pretty smart, what are you going to do? You're probably going to act out. You know, the bright ones can either turn it into something funny, or to you know, walk away or apologize or do whatever. But the people who don't have intelligence, you know, they're really at risk. And I think both of these people were probably in that group, you know?
And at the same time, you know, we've got loads of men on death row throughout the United States whose IQs are close to 70.
Yes. Yeah, in fact, they did some research on the IQ in prisons, and they found that I think they tested 7 different sections in the prison. And they found that the lower the IQ, the more violence in the prison. The higher IQ, the less violence in the prison. I mean, they've even done research on violence and countries. and shown that countries with lower IQ tend to have more violence. Countries with higher IQ tend to have less violence.
Makes sense to me.
Mhm.
Yeah, but IQ is
It's
kind
almost like saying it's not gendered, Tom.
well, it's complicated. And it's not
Yeah.
one-sided. That's the point. This is not a simple kind of thing. This is really complicated stuff.
Mhm.
And the feminists are trying to make it into this thing about it's men bad, women good. And
Yeah.
I'm sure this documentary is going to do the same daggone thing.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure that fits the intellectual needs of a lot of feminists to be able to
Yeah,
their own model.
amen. Amen.
Yeah. Well, that is the brilliance of feminism, that it's very simple, and it provides you with a ready-made template to apply to nearly any situation in life.
That will automatically win.
Yes, exactly.
It'll automatically win because it's, inoculated with the gynocentrism.
Mm-hmm. It allows
At the
any
same
woman
time-
to. Oh, sorry, Paul.
No, I was just going to say at the same time, that's the bane of the men's movement, is that
Yes.
it requires so much nuance and honest, raw intelligence to even wrap your head around the concepts and understand what's going on in
Yes.
a sophisticated way versus, 1 and 1 equals 3, and you're a hater if you disagree with me.
Yes. Yeah, I say all the time that feminism is downhill. Everything they try and do, it's like a downhill. They just coast. Men's work, it's uphill. You got to struggle just to even get a little fact in there,
Yeah. Yeah.
Ay.
Yeah, there's just something so incredibly emotionally powerful about that narrative. I think all you
Yes.
need is a couple of stories that provoke a certain kind of reaction in men and women of outrage, of a sense of injury and self-righteous indignation, and in men of this deep desire to protect,
Yes.
save. And once you've done that, the person is almost impervious to
Yes.
any dose of reality.
Karen Strawn told me the other day about this research that may be connected to what we're talking about. And it's where they took women's tears. They got these women who could cry and cry and cry, right? And sad tears, not onion tears, but sad tears. They put them in little vials, these tears. They soaked some little pads with these tears and put them on under men's noses and had them sniff these tears for a while. Then they tested them. Guess what they found? The men who sniffed the women's sad tears, testosterone went down. And sex drive went down. All because of the women's tears. And part of the constituency of those tears, apparently, is oxytocin. And oxytocin is an affiliative hormone. It makes you want to cuddle, it makes you want to come closer, right? And so when you pair the testosterone coming down with the possibility of oxytocin pushing him to want to help, that to me may be the first little link into gynocentrism, because I'm sure there's more biological stuff out there that's because it's automatic for men. Men do this automatically. They do it without thinking,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And who knows, that little piece may be the start of some connections that we can make biologically of why we do this. Why Amazon Studios does this thing. They do it because, they're pushed to protect women.
Yeah.
Kind of shines a new light on drinking male tears, doesn't it?
Yeah. The other part of the research, have they done the opposite? Have they had women sniff?
I don't think so. I was thinking about that. I was also thinking about separating them out and have the tears separated based on how attractive the woman is and see if that makes a difference,
Yeah.
I would be interested in seeing what happens to women's sex drive when they encounter male tears.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a hormonal response in men, and these neurochemicals are affected simply by, whatever is in the tears.
Yeah.
I would like to see what happens with women, because that's part of the whole difficulty emotionally of sexual politics.
Well,
is that we have feminists screaming at us, "You dirty pigs, show us how you feel. You idiots, show us how you feel.
yeah.
You emotional incompetence, show us how you feel." And then, of course, the moment you show them how you feel,
Run.
whiner, loser.
Yeah.
I was
a
going to say,
reaction of such disgust. Yeah.
yes, if male tears brought on more female sexuality, you'd have a lot of crying men, you know?
Yes, it would.
Yes,
But I
we'd
bet
all be
there
crying.
would be some interesting results
Mhm.
in that. Well, folks,
Yeah.
should we move on to our recognitions?
Yeah, why
Yes.
not?
Does anybody have anything else to add on Lorena Bobbitt and John Wayne?
Oh, just that it's a sad saga, eh?
Really sad.
Yeah, all around sad. Not
Yeah.
just one
Remarkable.
side sad. It's all
Yeah.
around sad.
Well, and we're witnessing the birth of another typical feminist hero.
Yeah, I'm afraid so.
Yeah.
Standing ovation when she went on TV. She got a standing ovation from people.
It's unbelievable. And the other one last thing I was going to say was that part of the narrative that, at least according to Amazon Prime, that they're working within is that she was somehow her pain and suffering were belittled and sidelined and even made the butt of jokes by a male-dominated media. Again, I haven't done extensive research into what was going on in 1993. 1993 was already, all feminism all the time. In 1993, I was working at a shelter for abused women, and I remember this case and the reaction it prompted, and there was a heck of a lot of sympathy for Lorena Bobbitt. And partly, as we've already said, and she was not the butt of jokes. It was her husband who was the butt of jokes. So again, it's just this complete rewriting of reality in service of some crazy kind of now necessary feminist restitution. But in fact, this is just more of the same old story of sympathizing with the violent woman and jeering at and mocking and belittling the male victim.
Exactly. I had the same reaction when I saw that. I thought she was the butt of jokes because I was 40 when this happened. It's like I heard a lot of the jokes, and none of them were about Lorena. They were all about John.
Man, if you'd have made a joke about Lorena Bobbitt as a potential rape victim, because that was the accusation at the time, he had raped her and he was physically abusive. If you had made a joke about that in any peer group, you would have been ostracized.
Yep. Yes.
But of jokes. Oh, that's a joke.
That's a joke.
Yeah.
So onward.
Onward. Tom, we have, or I was going to, I'll ask you about the other one. Janice, we have somebody to designate for the accolades from the three of us for their, we say good deeds.
Yes.
And we do that every time we do one of these talks. So who is it?
So this week we are going to applaud Howard Stern. He was a voice who was vocal and insistent that he did not believe Lorena. He did not believe her stories of abuse. She still holds a grudge against him to this day, apparently. So he receives our award this week for his good deed, and also specifically that he raised money for John's surgery. So he did a good thing in that, we feel.
Absolutely. A deserving man in that account. And Tom, now it's time for the flying puta.
Bring her out. Bring her out.
Yes, let her fly across the screen.
There she goes. There she goes.
There she is.
There she goes. Oh,
who was it, Paul?
It was none other than Lorena Bobbitt herself.
Oh.
For cutting off the penis of a man for, I think the evidence on record says, quite frankly, that she lied about her motives, that she was feeling hurt and selfish, and in a fit of rage, she severed her husband's penis and threw it in a field, and has never expressed one bit of remorse for doing so. Nothing contrite from her whatsoever. Excuse me, losing my voice here. But I think she's a deserving recipient of the flying puta. She's living a lie.
The flying Lorena.
And she's whoring herself out to the DV industry right
Mhm.
now with a fake story.
Yeah.
By the way, for you guys, when you see this, Lorena Bobbitt is trending on Twitter right now. So if you tweet this discussion with her name somewhere in it, that will go into that discussion for all the world to see. And we'd like to encourage you to do that.
Amen.
Mhm.
So we finished?
A pause of silence.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Pause that refreshes.
Must be time to wrap things up.
And now we're going to do this every week, right?
Yeah.
Have we decided
That's
to do it
the
every week?
plan. Yeah.
It was really great, the feedback we've gotten. And so it encouraged us to try and do it every week and just see what happens. So,
And also to let everybody know, we're aware of the concerns about Janice's feed.
Yeah.
She is in a slow internet zone.
Mhm.
We are going to do our best. There are some measures we're going to be taking, a direct wire into modems, and maybe a new camera, some other things to see if we can improve on this. And hopefully before too long, we'll see some of that. But we ask in the meantime for your patience. I know you want to see her lovely face all the clearer, and we would like you to be able to do that.
and so would we.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
Fair enough. So we finished?
I think we're finished.
All right.
So,
That's good. We'll see you next week, guys.
Bye-bye.
Y'all take care.
bye-bye.
We'll see you.